Counting down to our 100th episode spectacular, we're keeping things personal for episode 99. Last time Billy shared his autobiographical top 10, and now it's my turn. So these are my 10 most personal movies. I like to look at things I'm into at any given time and narrow them down as specifically as possible, as a way to see what kind of person I am at the moment. Sometimes I discover things like my love for songs covered by members of a different gender than the song's original artist. Not sure why, it's just a thing I gravitated towards. Mostly, I learned that it's not a genre that I love, it's a specific subgenre that I love. Sometimes it's a tiny sliver of a small part of a subgenre. I like getting specific with my likes, so that's what I'm doing for my top 10. These are sometimes scattered and disparate films that occupy complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think that's just who we are. Our lives are, for the most part, a collection of random experiences that pull at our edges until we become the shape that we like the most. So in the interest of finding my edges, I'm a firm believer that if you want to make fun of something, you have to love it first. Otherwise, it's just being mean. Because comedy has always been very important to me, I love a good spoof. A lot of movies have tarnished the good name of spoof in more recent years, but I'm always hopeful for another Airplane or Spaceball, the next Hot Shots or The Naked Gun, Galaxy Quest, Young Frankenstein, Not Another Teen Movie. These are all comedies that really appreciate the genre they're parodying, and I like all of them. But a comedy that can pass as a good example of the type of film it's spoofing, that is what I love. As funny as it is, nobody would ever confuse Blazing Saddles with an actual Western, but Hot Fuzz is both hilarious and a good action movie. Black Dynamite absolutely nails 70s blaxploitation, and the one that makes my list for its pitch-perfect Connery-era Bond spoofery, OSS 117, CAIRO Nest of Spies.
OSS 117. Pour vous servir.
Jean Dujardin's French intelligence man perfectly nails everything about the James Bond of the 60s. Not content to just nail the wardrobe and the cars and the politics of the era, OSS 117 mimics the film stock, the color palette, the day-for-night shooting and rear projection photography the early Terrence Young Bonds utilized. The fight choreography, too, is hilariously perfect. It's an earlier glimpse at the physical comedy gifts of Dujardin that would later win him an Oscar for The Artist. But the movie doesn't stop there. What really sets this film apart from other spoofs like it is the cultural mockery it employs. OSS 117 is dim-witted. He's an arrogant misogynist simply because he's too dumb to know any better. All the things that make Connery's Bond harder to stomach by today's standards are the butt of the jokes in CAIRO Nest of Spies. A true spoof of the spy movies of the 50s and 60s wouldn't be doing its job if it didn't make fun of every part of the genre, warts and all, which is why I love OSS 117. Next up, we're going sci-fi. We've covered this genre plenty and talked about all manner of subgenres before, but one that gets me every time is the tiny science fiction film with a big idea. No sweeping epics needed, just a simple story that hints at something universal. That seems easy enough to do, right? I frankly don't understand why there aren't more movies like this. Some of my favorites are Memory and Heartache in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Shane Carruth's micro-budget work with Time in Primer and Human Connection in Upstream Color, Ex Machina and Moon both lend humanity to man's own creations, but the little movie with the big idea I like the most is Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin.
Why are you in Scotland?
I just wanted to get away from it all.
Yeah, why here?
Because it's nowhere.
This movie is a very big idea in a tiny van-sized package. A story about an alien disguised as a woman driving around Scotland luring men back to, well, who knows what this place is, covers a surprising amount of thematic ground. Scarlett Johansson's Alien has been interpreted critically as an immigrant, as feminist, and as an allegory for race. What's at the heart of this story is a being that is entirely other, exploring the human experience. Whether that means eating cake, making love, or in one scene that is burned into my nightmares forever, witnessing a tragedy unfold, Under the Skin provides an opportunity for us as an audience to more objectively look at what being alive in the world can mean. As a guy in his mid-30s, for better or worse, I was partially raised by action movies, and I dig them, in all their shapes and sizes. In fact, action movies make up my next two picks, so I won't waste any more time prefacing the sizzling mayhem ahead. One of my favorite types of action films is the kind that truly does not give a fuck. This love is born out of the action greats of the 80s and early 90s like Total Recall, Lethal Weapon, Face Off, and The Rock, movies that have a fourth act where they freaking invade Cuba. Or, my choice for this slot, Arnold Schwarzenegger's best performance ever, don't at me, in True Lies.
tired.
True Lies features physics-defying set pieces, a scenery-chewing villain, a bridge that is out, and a damn nuke going off in the Florida Keys. And as the sun sets on a mushroom cloud, lesser movies would call it a day with what could be a satisfying conclusion to a comfy little 3-act movie. But what's that you say? Arnold's daughter has been kidnapped and held hostage at the top of a skyscraper in downtown Miami, and there's a Harrier jet right here that I can borrow? Let's just keep rolling on this, shall we? True Lies is a nearly meta tongue-in-cheek operation that, with a liberal definition of spoof, might nearly qualify for my first category. But the beauty of Cameron's film is in the balance of action and heart. The bonkers set pieces are all there, but they're greater than the sum of their parts because you never lose sight of the fact that this movie is about a family. And so it pulls off the extravagant 4th act shenanigans in a way that doesn't seem like a why the hell not kind of move, which is why it's one of my favorites of all time. On the complete other side of the action movie spectrum is the bottle episode variety. The action movie that takes place all in one building, or a battleship, or a cowardly western town, or a bus, or to a much lesser extent, a cruise liner. In favor of a go anywhere and do anything mentality of some other action films, these movies trap a hero in one spot and we get to watch as they struggle to get out. I nearly picked a jungle-shaped bottle for this one, but I'd be lying if I picked anything other than Die Hard.
Missiles, automatic weapons, and enough plastic explosives to orbit Arnold Schwarzenegger.
They're down to 9 now, counting the skydiver you met. These guys are mostly European, judging by their clothing labels, and... cigarettes.
There's not much we haven't already said about Die Hard here on CineFix. It's a structurally perfect film about a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. If I'm being completely honest, this is possibly my all-time favorite, and if it weren't for the narrative thread I'm trying for in this video, it would certainly rank higher than number 7. Point here is Die Hard perfectly captures the relatable everyman fighting against impossible odds, not for fame or fortune, just for his family. That and peak Alan Rickman villainy ought to be enough to get on anybody's all-time top 10. Bouncing around to another completely disparate data point on my personal movie chart, let's talk about feelings for a moment. Any theater teacher I ever had would hate to hear me say this, but a lot of the time, I don't want to be put through the ringer. The spectrum of human emotion is very wide, and I'll admit that by and large, I prefer to stay in that comfy midsection. However, from time to time, I do have a taste for movies that just destroy me. Especially since I've become a parent, films like Arrival have lain waste to my insides, and I haven't dared revisit Sophie's Choice. I first saw A Ghost Story last year, and its meditation on our insignificant niche and the sheer enormity of time still haunts me. But if there's one filmmaker that continues to outdo his own emotional warfare, it's Darren Aronofsky, who has on 3 separate occasions made the saddest movie I'd ever seen: Requiem for a Dream, The Wrestler, and my number 6, The Fountain. This film is downright beautiful. Though there are stark shifts in production design between the eras, Aronofsky finds technical ways to connect different times and places that are centuries apart to tell one clear and continuous story. But The Fountain ticks all of my boxes, not just the technical. It's a heartbreaking story about love, loss, and grief that literally spans 1,000 years. For me, this film is about being so scared of losing the ones that you love, you don't take advantage of the time you have with them. So both as a guy who appreciates the craft of filmmaking and a human with feelings, this movie broke me in half. Instead of the epic, sweeping type of romance, my number 5 slot is going for a completely non-romantic love story. This covers buddy cop movies like Lethal Weapon and Bad Boys, and Guy Ritchie's recent Sherlock Holmes films. It covers family comedies like Paddington or Ratatouille, odd couple pairings like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Major League, which, quick little tangent here, in addition to teaching me how to cuss, introduced me to one of my favorite tropes of all time: blue-collar guy and punk rock guy sharing a moment together in the midst of a celebration. These stories show love in all its many forms across genre, and one of my favorites of all time is Rian Johnson's The Brothers Bloom.
All right, let's do this. Let's just get it done. So, first you say, I'm quitting, Steven, I'm out. Then I say...
Do we have to go through this again?
And then you make a show of putting on your jacket, and you say, no, I mean it this time, Steven. This time, I'm really out.
And then you say, let's have a drink, and then in the morning, Bloom, you'll have come to your senses.
The story of two legendary artists of the long con, the brothers Bloom, is quirky and fun and has a cold open that's worth studying. Seriously, the Faces song as the film's title bursts onto screen in literal fireworks. Even as I'm writing this, I'm digging that song up in my iTunes library because I need to hear it. But what this movie does better than most is deal with the sometimes uneasy love between family. Steven loves Bloom so much that he only wants to make him happy, going to often infuriating lengths to write him a perfect life. Bloom, meanwhile, loves Steven in spite of that. And as they embark on what might be their final job together, it's an experience that is heartwarming, twee, and dark in equal measure. A very specific type of love on full display. Let's transition from feeling lots of love to feeling lots of scared. I've never bought into gore for the sake of gore, and jump scares are fine and all, but truth be told, I've never liked horror films until the last few years. With so many things in the world to be uneasy about these days, horror as a genre has tapped into a panicky, terrified zeitgeist and frankly, been the most interesting type of movie out there. So, a scary movie where the monster is a metaphor has become one of my favorite hyper-specific subgenres. Going back to the original Atomic Age monster Godzilla and the Cold War's Day the Earth Stood Still, this isn't a terribly new phenomenon. Get Out's run to a Best Picture nomination speaks volumes to what's happening in the genre. More recent favorites are It Follows and a nightmarish take on sex and intimacy, Goodnight Mommy's quiet twin terror, The Invitation's eerie tension among a group of old friends, and The Witch and its religious zeal. But the movie that truly made me reevaluate horror is The Babadook. What I love about this movie is that nearly every conversation I've had about it brings up a subtly different interpretation. For me, the film is about grief and how all you can do is learn to live with it. At the center of the story is a mother and son with an unbelievably tragic past that manifests itself as a monster threatening to kill them both. But even deeper than that, this movie can be a Rorschach test, a blank screen onto which you can project your own relationship to your parents or your kids or whoever in your life you love but also kind of hate sometimes, which actually makes The Babadook a pretty similar movie to The Brothers Bloom. And that is a perfect example of finding your specific likes. By tracing your own outline, you start to notice similarities like this. And I just think that's cool. On the other side of my outline, far away from my emotional baggage, lies the purely aesthetic. A movie that without talking about anything else, we can almost all agree it just looks f***ing good. This is a category I call the super lush. These are films where every little detail takes you to a completely different place and time. This is where Barry Lyndon lives alongside Pan's Labyrinth, where Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility can fit in with Coppola's take on Bram Stoker's Dracula. A third of listmaker The Fountain qualifies as well, but if there's one that outlushes the rest, it's Milos Forman's AMADEUS. From the dank squalor of an 18th century asylum to the opulence of the Austrian royal court and everything in between, the film looks and feels and tastes and smells like the place and time in which it's set. What's more, the exacting detail with which the film is designed mirrors Salieri's obsession with the careless and arrogant Mozart. So the postured atmosphere of the film has a pinch of relevance to the characters it portrays. And that's exactly why it earns this spot. It's not style over substance. There is reason behind its exacting, precise, and just plain gorgeous to look at design. For my number 2 slot, I'm highlighting the 3 movies that will forever be tied for my number 1. And I know it makes 0 sense to feature 3 movies tied for first at number 2, but it's my list, so bear with me. The first is Jaws. When I saw it at what was, I'm sure, too young an age, I immediately became fascinated by sharks. I wanted shark books and toys and talked about wanting to be a sharkologist, which I was totally convinced was a name for a real job. But then came Indiana Jones, a movie I probably could have watched at a younger age than Jaws, but hey, talk to my parents about that. Either way, Indy's adventures made me want to be an archaeologist more than anything, even more than a sharkologist. Cut to 1993 after 11-year-old Clint saw Jurassic Park in the theater a dozen times or so, and wouldn't you know it, wanted to be a paleontologist. I was so sure of it. Sharks and relics buried in the sand were just phases. Then, at some point later, I was floored to realize the same guy made all 3 of those movies, which gave way almost immediately to, how cool is that? I want to make those too. You'd think for such a watershed moment in my life, I'd remember the date and time and where I was standing when all that hit me, but unfortunately I don't. I do, however, remember realizing the power movies had over me. These films are specific only in that moment of realization is specifically mine. And if you've made it this far into a video like this, I'm sure you've got one of your own, and I'd love to hear about it. Finally, with my last spot on this list, I'm not so much looking at my edges so much as I am the movies that shift my edges. Movies that add pins to parts of the map I haven't been to. These are movies that aren't about me. There's no denying the overrepresentation of my own demographic on screen, and just by looking at this list, the problem is evident. It's something that in recent years I've focused on addressing, and thankfully I'm getting more opportunities to see other people's stories on screen. Just in the last few years, films like Moonlight, Get Out, Brooklyn, Tangerine have all shared the experiences of people that don't look, act, or think like me, and I find myself seeking that out more and more. And because there's no real way to rank one over the other, I'll just pick one. Not because it's a better film or a better example of what I'm talking about, just because I truly loved Call Me By Your Name.
Is there anything you don't know?
I know nothing, Oliver.
Well, you seem to know more than anybody else around here.
Well, if you only knew how little I know about the things that matter.
What things that matter?
You know what things.
For me, this film about a young man's sexual exploration is a story on its surface I can't relate to. There's nothing in my past that translates directly to this film, but the love and care with which the film was made, the intimacy and honesty and warmth that inhabits Elio and Oliver's story is something that I know. What I love about the movie is it tells a tale with which I have nothing in common in such an empathetic way. That's also why I loved Moonlight, Get Out, Brooklyn, and Tangerine, and all the other great films recently that have told me unfamiliar narratives. These movies remind me that my edges are never truly set, that how I feel about movies is a living, evolving thing that's always looking for different experiences, different stories to share. That's my hope anyway. And that's why these are 10 or 12 of my most personal movies of all time. That'll do it for this episode. Let me know in the comments what your favorite hyper-specific niche genre is, and be sure to subscribe to CineFix so you won't miss our 100th movie list. Spoiler alert, we haven't decided what we're doing for it yet.